People say there is nothing more terrifying than a scorned woman's fury. They are wrong. Fury is loud, chaotic, and burns out fast. True devastation comes from a woman who does not get angry. She moves with the cold precision of an architect restructuring her life. When his young mistress sent me 60 explicit photos to prove she claimed my bed, she had no idea she just triggered the dormant malware I built to burn their empire down. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Violet Revenge Stories, where we must humbly share that YouTube has recently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us entirely without an operating budget. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can cover their living expenses and continue creating these experiences for you, which you can easily do by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the video description or comments. Now, let me introduce you to the architect of this story, Violet Baker. The glowing digital clock on the bedside table read exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. The San Francisco skyline stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, a sea of silent, twinkling lights that offered no warmth. Beside me, the sheets were perfectly smooth, untouched, and cold. Marcus was supposed to be at a late-night executive retreat, securing final investments. I was 34 years old, the invisible lead engineer and the anonymous system architect behind Veritas Shield, the city's most formidable cybersecurity firm, and I was about to discover exactly how vulnerable my own perimeter had become. My phone screen flared to life on the nightstand, cutting through the darkness with a sharp, sterile glow. It was not a single notification. It was a relentless, rhythmic vibration, a digital barrage that seemed to suck the oxygen straight out of the room. I picked up the device, the metal casing cool against my palm. The screen displayed 60 image files, sent consecutively from an untraceable burner number. I opened the first file. Most people, upon seeing their spouse's naked flesh entangled with someone else, would experience a visceral, shattering collapse. I felt nothing of the sort. Instead, I felt the familiar, icy descent into pure logic. There was Marcus Thorne, the charismatic, untouchable chief executive officer of Veritas Shield, my husband, and beneath him, staring directly into the camera with a predatory smirk, was Chloe Vance. She was the newly appointed Director of Public Relations, 24 years old, hired just 3 months ago to soften the company's corporate image. It appeared she was doing an exceedingly thorough job. I swiped to the next image, and the next. 60 distinct visual confirmations of betrayal. Yet, my eyes did not linger on the sweat on their skin or the explicit angles of their bodies. My vision bypassed the flesh and zeroed in on the background, the reinforced steel paneling, the unmistakable hum of the liquid cooling towers barely visible in the corner of the frame, the ambient, low-level blue light emitted by the mainframe. They were not in a cheap hotel room. They were in Tahoe. More specifically, they were in the basement of our cabin, inside a room we called the Vault. It was a top-secret, private server laboratory where I had spent hundreds of hours, bleeding my intellect into the keyboard to hand-code the core architectural systems that made Veritas Shield a billion-dollar enterprise. It was the heart of the company. It was my sanctuary. And Marcus had brought a walking liability right into the center of it. My thumb paused on the 47th photograph. Something small and green caught the light, gleaming against Chloe's manicured finger as it rested on Marcus's chest. I zoomed in, pixel by pixel. The chill that had been spreading through my veins suddenly crystallized into something entirely different. It was an antique emerald ring. Not just any ring, it was my grandmother's heirloom, a priceless artifact that had survived wars and generations. A piece of my bloodline that I kept secured in the Tahoe cabin's biometric wall safe. Beneath the final photo, a text message glowed in stark black and white. "He says your encryption key is expired. Try not to break down." The silence in the penthouse was absolute, heavy with the weight of shifting paradigms. A normal wife might have hurled the phone against the glass window, shattering the screen. She might have called his phone, screaming obscenities into the voicemail, or collapsed onto the floor in a puddle of tears and hyperventilation. I did none of those things. I simply blinked, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my pupils. I threw the covers off, swung my legs over the edge of the bed, and walked barefoot across the hardwood floor into my home office. I sat down in the ergonomic chair, the leather cool against my skin, and powered on my workstation. 6 high-definition monitors flickered to life in unison, bathing the dark room in a stark, uncompromising light. I plugged my phone directly into the mainframe terminal with a thick data cable. With deliberate, unhurried keystrokes, I initiated a deep data extraction protocol. I did not care about the emotional weight of those images. I cared about the data they carried. I silently stripped the metadata from all 60 files. The Global Positioning System coordinates confirmed the exact latitude and longitude of the Tahoe cabin. The timestamps mapped out a chronological timeline of their evening, down to the exact millisecond. But the most critical piece of data was not in the photos themselves. I opened a secure, encrypted tunnel to the vault's internal network and pulled the system access logs. The ledger appeared on my third monitor, lines of green code scrolling upward in the dark. There it was. Marcus's biometric signature had bypassed the primary security gate at 8 o'clock in the evening, followed immediately by an unauthorized, manual override to allow a secondary, unregistered physical presence into the room. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers as I stared at the irrefutable evidence displayed across my screens. Chloe thought she had sent me a weapon to destroy my marriage. She had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the game. I did not categorize this as an affair. I did not classify this as marital heartbreak. I highlighted the access log, tagged it with a red security flag, and saved it to an offline, encrypted drive. This was a critical infrastructure compromise. It was a Level 1 security breach. And in the world of cybersecurity, when a malicious entity infiltrates your system, you do not cry. You isolate the threat. You study its behavior, and then you quietly orchestrate its absolute deletion. The front door clicked open at exactly 7:30 in the morning. Marcus strolled into the kitchen, carrying 2 cups of artisanal roast from that pretentious cafe down the street. He smelled of roasted beans, mint gum, and a faint, almost imperceptible trace of expensive dry shampoo. He had rehearsed his entrance. I could see it in the relaxed set of his shoulders, the carefully crafted look of corporate exhaustion on his handsome, perfectly shaved face. "Morning. Beautiful," he said, leaning in to press a kiss against my cheek. His lips felt like dry, cold paper against my skin. "I am so sorry I never made it back last night. The team and I were locked in a war room at the office. We had to run emergency stress tests on the core architecture for the initial public offering next week. You know how it is. It was an absolute nightmare. But we got the baseline stabilized. I was standing at the marble island, meticulously peeling the shell off a hard-boiled egg. I did not look up. I did not point out that the Tahoe cabin was a 4-hour drive from his supposed office war room. I just smiled, a gentle, understanding upward curve of my lips. We sat at the breakfast table. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, sharp shadows across the room. He talked, and I listened. He spoke about the Veritas Shield algorithms as if they had sprung directly from his own brilliant mind. He used buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shift, and robust security frameworks, masking his profound technical ignorance behind a veil of corporate charisma. Then, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, adopting a tone of gentle persuasion. "Listen, Violet," he began, swirling the expensive coffee in his cup. "About the global launch event next Thursday, I have been talking with the primary venture capitalists. They really buy into the narrative of the solitary, self-made tech prodigy. A solo founder story drives the company valuation up by at least 20%. It would be best if you maintain your anonymous status. No press interviews, no stage time. Just let me be the face of this operation. If we tell the world my wife wrote the foundational code, it dilutes the brand narrative. We are a team, right? What is mine is yours. I took a slow, measured sip of my Earl Grey tea. The audacity of his request was staggering, yet mathematically predictable. Of course, Marcus, I replied evenly, keeping my voice soft and devoid of any sharp edges. Whatever is best for the future of the company. The sheer relief that washed over his features was almost comical. He truly believed he had married a docile, socially awkward programmer who preferred the safety of the shadows. He had no idea the shadows were exactly where I did my most devastating work. Right on cue. My phone vibrated against the mahogany wood of the table. The screen lit up with a preview of a new message from the same untraceable burner number. It was Chloe. Are you locked in the bathroom bawling your eyes out yet? He told me you are practically a robot. Try to show some emotion when he drops the news. Marcus glanced at the glowing device, raising an eyebrow. Work, he asked lightly. Just a minor system notification, I said. I picked up the phone, placed it face down on the table, and picked up my teacup again. I drank the remaining warm liquid with deliberate swallows. Not a single tremor in my hand, not a single erratic spike in my breathing. Once Marcus excused himself to take a shower, humming a cheerful, victorious tune under the cascading water. I walked straight back to my multi-monitor fortress. The affair was merely the surface symptom. I needed to diagnose the actual systemic disease. I bypassed the standard employee directory and initiated a ghost protocol sweep of the executive financial servers. I wanted to see the capitalization table. I wanted to look at the granular equity distributions. My eyes scanned thousands of lines of encrypted financial data until I found her file, Chloe Vance. Her compensation package was absurdly inflated for a mid-level marketing role, but it was the hidden bonus structure that made my pulse steady into a cold, flat rhythm. Marcus had not just given her a high-paying job. He had authorized a quiet, backdoor transfer of restricted stock units. Specifically, he was reallocating 5% of the founder equity directly into a shadow holding company registered under her name. That equity was intrinsically tied to the proprietary algorithms I had spent 3 years authoring. He was using my intellectual property to buy the loyalty of his mistress. But the digital breadcrumbs did not stop there. I tracked the legal authorization forms for the equity transfer back to a private, heavily encrypted folder on his personal drive. It took me exactly 14 minutes to crack his absurdly simple password. Inside the folder, I found a draft document titled Asset Separation Agreement. It was a divorce settlement, meticulously drawn up by a shark of a corporate lawyer. I read through the clauses, my mind processing the legal jargon with chilling clarity. Clause 4.2 stipulated that all intellectual property generated during the marriage would be classified as sole corporate assets. The timing of the document was calculated with ruthless precision. It was dated to be legally served exactly 48 hours after the initial public offering went live. He was planning to wait until Veritas Shield hit a market valuation of $2 billion. Then, he would blindside me, lock me into an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, force me out of the company with a meager cash settlement, and keep the billion-dollar empire and the new girl for himself. He thought I was a stepping stone. He thought he could just format my hard drive and install a new life without consequences. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about system administrator privileges. The pre-launch mixer was held on the rooftop terrace of an exclusive private club in the financial district, a venue designed specifically to make wealthy people feel even wealthier. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, predatory ambition, and the relentless clinking of crystal champagne flutes. It was a gathering of the Silicon Valley elite. The room was packed to the brim with venture capitalists, aggressive tech journalists, and angel investors, all hovering like well-dressed vultures eager to claim a piece of the Veritas Shield initial public offering. Marcus was in his absolute element. He stood near an elaborate, glowing ice sculpture carved into the shape of a shield, holding court and projecting the flawless aura of a visionary genius. I watched him casually sip a $200 glass of scotch while explaining the intricate complexities of the system architecture to a group of bankers. He used grand, sweeping hand gestures and confidently delivered technical explanations that were entirely fabricated. He was taking credit for thousands of hours of my exhausting, isolated labor, and the investors were hanging on to every single lie. I, on the other hand, was exactly where I was expected to be. I stood silently by a cold marble structural pillar, holding a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lime, fading into the ambient background noise. To the brilliant minds in this room, I was nothing more than the socially awkward, slightly eccentric wife of the charismatic chief executive officer. I was a mandatory accessory, required to smile for the initial photographs and then instantly forgotten once the flashes stopped. The heavy double doors of the terrace swung open, and the collective attention of the room subtly shifted. Chloe Vance walked in. She wore a backless crimson silk dress that clung to her in ways explicitly designed to completely derail the thought processes of every male investor in her vicinity. She floated through the crowd, a masterclass in aggressive public relations, dispensing dazzling smiles and rehearsed laughter. But my focus was solely on her right hand. Every time she reached out to accept a drink from a waiter, or gestured emphatically during a conversation, the ambient lighting caught the unmistakable, deep green fire of my grandmother's emerald ring. She was wearing it proudly on her index finger, deliberately flashing a priceless family heirloom to a room full of strangers. It was an unspoken victory banner waving right in my face, a silent declaration that she had conquered my home, my husband, and my legacy. Eventually, the crowd parted, and she made a direct, purposeful line toward my pillar. She stopped just close enough to invade my personal space, radiating a cloying scent of jasmine perfume and synthetic confidence. She looked me up and down, her eyes brimming with a sickening blend of false pity and overwhelming triumph. "Violet," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, carefully modulated to be loud enough for a nearby group of tech reporters to overhear. "I am so glad you decided to come out of your shell tonight. It really takes a very special kind of woman to stand back in the shadows and let her husband shine so brightly. We were just talking about your quiet resignation and all the silent sacrifices you make for Marcus. He simply could not build this massive empire without a supportive, traditional woman managing the domestic front." It was a flawlessly executed insult. It was designed to cement her status as the dynamic, intellectual equal of the chief executive officer, while simultaneously reducing me to a glorified housekeeper. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marcus detach himself from a group of wealthy bankers. He caught my gaze, his jaw tightening into a rigid line. He gave me a sharp, penetrating look, a silent but violent warning. His eyes explicitly commanded me to swallow my pride, to maintain his immaculate corporate image, and to absolutely not create an emotional scene in front of the major partners who were holding millions of dollars in investment capital. I turned my attention back to Chloe. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I let a slow, perfectly calibrated smile spread across my face, the kind of warm, vacant smile one might give to an overly enthusiastic child holding a broken toy. I reached out and gently tapped the rim of my water glass against her champagne flute. "Thank you, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth and projecting a serene, unwavering calm. "And I must say, that is a truly fascinating ring you have chosen to wear tonight. The cut of the stone is incredibly distinctive." I paused for exactly 1 second, letting my gaze drop from her eyes to the stolen jewelry, and then back up, locking onto her pupils with sudden, chilling clarity. I have always believed that antique pieces possess a certain dark irony. They manage to look absolutely flawless when paired with borrowed things. The artificial smile on Chloe's face immediately fractured. The color drained from her cheeks for a fraction of a second as her brain scrambled to decode the exact layer of threat I had just delivered. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend her newly claimed territory, but she found absolutely nothing to say. I gave her one last polite nod, turned on my heel, and walked away before she could recover her composure. When we finally returned to the penthouse late that night, the silence between Marcus and me was absolute and heavy. He assumed my quietness was the sulking defeat of a broken woman who had finally accepted her inferior place in his grand narrative. He poured himself a generous glass of aged whiskey, quietly celebrated his successful night of networking, and fell into a deep, oblivious sleep on his side of the king-sized bed. I did not sleep. I walked barefoot into my office, the glow of the sleeping city below me acting as my only illumination until the 6 large monitors flared to life. I tied my hair back into a tight knot, cracked my knuckles, and went to work. There would be no screaming matches in this house. There would be no tearful confrontations, no broken dishes, and certainly no desperate pleas for marriage counseling. Those were the predictable reactions of a victim. I was an elite systems engineer, and I was looking at a critically infected operating system. The only logical solution was a complete, structural wipe. For 8 unbroken hours, my fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard in a rhythmic, lethal dance. I was not writing standard administrative code. I was drafting a highly volatile override protocol, a piece of custom malware designed to completely bypass the very firewalls I had spent 3 years perfecting. Because I was the original architect, I knew exactly where all the structural weaknesses were buried deep within the core code. I knew every single blind spot in the Veritas Shield network. I routed my connection through a dozen encrypted proxy servers to mask my digital footprint. Then, I injected the malicious script directly into the central servers and the presentation network framework of the Moscone Center, the massive convention hall where the initial public offering launch was scheduled to take place in less than 48 hours. I bypassed the multi-factor authentication gates, slipping the code into the event system like a ghost passing through a solid wall. I configured the protocol to lie completely dormant, rendering it entirely invisible to every diagnostic scan and security sweep Marcus's technical team could possibly run. Next, I compiled the data payload. I gathered the 60 explicit photographs, the global positioning system coordinates, the unauthorized biometric access logs from the Tahoe cabin, and the highly confidential legal documents detailing his meticulously planned strategy to steal my intellectual property. I bundled this massive repository of digital ruin into a single, heavily encrypted execution file. I named the payload the Truth Patch. Finally, I linked the execution of the Truth Patch to a manual, remote trigger, hard-coding the command to bypass any localized attempts to shut the system down once it was activated. The stage was set. The digital explosives were wired tightly to the foundation of his billion-dollar house of cards. All I had to do now was wait for him to step up to the podium, smile for the flashing cameras, and confidently hand me the detonator. The cavernous expanse of the Moscone Center buzzed with the electric, high-stakes energy of a global technological coronation. Over 5,000 attendees, ranging from aggressive Wall Street analysts to eager tech bloggers, packed the main auditorium, their faces illuminated by the massive digital displays wrapping around the room. Dozens of high-definition broadcast cameras were positioned perfectly on elevated platforms, feeding the live stream to hundreds of thousands of shareholders watching from across the globe. This was the exact moment Veritas Shield transitioned from a private enterprise into a publicly traded titan. Backstage, inside the exclusive VIP green room, the air was suffocatingly tense, heavy with the smell of hairspray and nervous perspiration. Marcus paced the plush carpet like a caged panther, his tailored Italian suit fitting his frame flawlessly. He was rehearsing his opening lines under his breath, pausing occasionally to let a frantic makeup artist dab away the microscopic beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He was radiating a toxic mixture of intense anxiety and overwhelming arrogance. He stopped his pacing and turned his attention to me, his eyes quickly scanning my conservative, understated charcoal dress. "Listen to me carefully, Violet," he instructed, his tone brisk and entirely devoid of affection. "The production crew has finalized the seating chart. I need you sitting in the back, around row 45, completely out of the primary camera angles. The media narrative today is entirely focused on our vibrant, dynamic new era. We need the broadcast lenses squarely focused on the young leadership team in the front rows. It is nothing personal, It is just optical strategy. You understand, right? The young leadership team. He meant Chloe. He meant the woman currently standing by the catering table, adjusting the neckline of her sharp designer blazer. I understand perfectly, Marcus, I replied, my voice a smooth, unreadable flatline. Optical strategy is everything. Satisfied that I had obediently accepted my banishment to the shadows, he turned back to the mirror. As he did, Chloe seized her opportunity. She glided across the room, stopping directly beside me under the guise of inspecting a tray of sparkling water. She leaned in close, her lips barely an inch from my ear. "Take a good look around, Violet," she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss disguised as a friendly murmur. "Enjoy the view from the cheap seats, because the second the market opens today, the structural shift is permanent. I am going to be the most powerful woman standing next to him, in the boardroom, on the magazine covers, and most definitely in his bed. You are just a legacy system that is about to be completely uninstalled." I did not flinch. I did not turn my head to acknowledge her proximity. I calmly reached out, picked up a glass of iced water, and took a slow, refreshing sip. "Let her have her petty," whispered Victory. "Let her believe she had successfully hacked the mainframe of my life." I slipped my free hand into the pocket of my dress and retrieved my phone. I bypassed my standard contacts and opened a heavily encrypted messaging application. I selected a single, unnamed contact thread. It belonged to Arthur Sterling, an absolutely ruthless, notoriously effective corporate litigation attorney whom I had retained privately 3 weeks prior. Marcus, with all his supposed mastery of security, had absolutely no idea Arthur even existed. I typed a single sentence. "Are all the legal documents ready?" The response materialized on my screen less than 10 seconds later. "Every injunction, intellectual property reclamation, and emergency asset freeze is signed, sealed, and waiting for your green light, awaiting the signal." I locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket, just as the stage manager burst into the room, holding up a hand with 5 fingers extended. "5 minutes to broadcast. Mr. Thorne," the manager announced loudly. "We need you at the curtain right now." Marcus took one final, deep breath, adjusting his silk tie. He marched out of the green room, flanked by his entourage, leaving me behind in the sudden quiet. I gave them exactly a 2-minute head start before I quietly exited through the back door, navigating the labyrinth of darkened service corridors until I reached my designated seat in row 45. It was the perfect vantage point. I was enveloped in the dim lighting of the general audience, completely invisible to the high-powered spotlights sweeping across the front rows where Chloe sat, practically glowing with smug anticipation. A profound, booming voice echoed through the state-of-the-art surround sound system, introducing the man of the hour. The massive digital screens behind the stage flared to life, displaying the sleek, silver logo of Veritas Shield. Marcus walked out from the wings. The auditorium erupted into thunderous, deafening applause. Thousands of people rose to their feet, cheering for the visionary they believed he was. He stood at the center of the stage, bathing in the adulation, raising his hands in a gesture of humble gratitude that he had practiced perfectly. "Welcome," Marcus projected into his headset microphone, his voice resonating with deep, manufactured sincerity. "Today, we do not just launch a public company, we launch a new global standard. We live in a world where trust is fractured, where vulnerabilities hide in the dark. But at Veritas Shield, our entire philosophy is built on absolute transparency, unbreakable ethical foundations, and a security architecture that is fundamentally impenetrable." I sat back in my chair, the darkness of row 45 shielding my movements. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my titanium-cased tablet. I rested it quietly on my lap. Marcus continued pacing the stage, his hands gesturing passionately. "We protect your most vital assets because we believe that integrity is the ultimate firewall." I woke the tablet screen. It did not ask for a facial scan or a fingerprint. It required a hard-coded manual override key. I stared at the blinking cursor. This was the point of no return. Once I hit the final keystroke, the blast radius would decimate everything Marcus had built, everything he had stolen, and everyone who had helped him do it. With steady, deliberate fingers, I typed in a unique sequence of exactly 12 characters. It was my grandmother's date of birth, the exact numeric combination that opened the biometric safe in Tahoe, the safe Chloe had so brazenly violated. I pressed the Enter key. The execution command left my device, traveling through the encrypted proxy tunnels I had built, silently slicing through the convention center's primary network defenses, and latching directly onto the truth patch malware sitting dormant in the core presentation servers. The system was armed. The countdown reached 0. "We are the impenetrable fortress of the modern digital age," Marcus declared, raising his right hand in a triumphant fist, pausing for the anticipated wave of applause. But the applause never came. In the exact fraction of a second that his fist reached its apex, the colossal, 80-foot light-emitting diode screen behind him, the one that had been displaying the crisp, corporate blue logo of Veritas Shield, suffered a catastrophic visual failure. It did not just glitch, it violently inverted. The soothing blue was instantly obliterated, replaced by a blinding, aggressive crimson red that bathed the entire Moscone Center auditorium in the color of a global emergency. A harsh digital screech ripped through the state-of-the-art surround sound system, forcing several people in the front rows to cover their ears. The screech abruptly cut off, replaced by a synthetic, icy artificial intelligence voice that echoed off the high ceilings. "Warning, internal security breach detected. Core infrastructure compromised. Initiating public purge protocol." Marcus froze, his hands still awkwardly suspended in the air. He turned his head slowly, his perfectly rehearsed smile mutating into an expression of profound confusion as he stared up at the massive red canvas. The screen shifted. It no longer displayed the carefully crafted revenue projections. Instead, raw, unedited system architecture logs began scrolling rapidly from the bottom to the top. To the average person, it was just a wall of green text. But to the thousands of venture capitalists, tech journalists, and industry analysts sitting in the audience, it was incredibly legible. The logs paused, magnifying a specific block of data. It was the biometric access ledger for the Tahoe server room. The artificial intelligence voice returned, reading the text aloud with chilling clarity. "Unauthorized access confirmed. Chief Executive Officer Marcus Thorne executed manual override to admit non-cleared civilian personnel, Chloe Vance, into Level 1 classified hardware sector." A collective, synchronized gasp rippled through the sea of 5,000 attendees. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a pressurized vacuum, heavy with the realization of what was unfolding. Marcus grabbed his headset microphone. "Cut the feed," he barked, his voice no longer the smooth baritone of a visionary leader, but the shrill, frantic bark of a cornered animal. "Control booth, shut the system down right now. We are experiencing a targeted cyber attack." He was wrong. It was not an attack from the outside. It was a demolition from the inside out. And the demolition had only just begun. The server logs on the massive screen dissolved, replaced by a rapid-fire slideshow. It was the visual payload. The 60 explicit photographs I had carefully curated were now being broadcast to the entire world on an 80-foot high-definition canvas. I had, of course, run the images through an automated obscuring filter. The physical, legally compromising areas of their entangled bodies were heavily blurred into pixelated mosaics, completely shielding me from any revenge pornography litigation. However, the filter was specifically programmed to hyperfocus and sharpen their faces. The screen projected Chloe's flushed, mocking expression and Marcus's eyes shut in ecstasy, blown up to the size of a 2-story building. The images aggressively zoomed in on the background, highlighting the highly sensitive liquid cooling towers of the proprietary server room, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the chief executive officer had turned the company's most secure vault into his personal hotel room. The final image locked onto the screen, freezing in place. It zoomed in relentlessly on Chloe's right hand resting against Marcus's chest. illuminating the antique emerald ring with crystal clarity. Below the magnified gemstone, a stark white text box appeared, displaying a screenshot of the exact message she had sent me at 3 o'clock in the morning. "He says your encryption key is expired. Try not to break down." The pressurized silence in the auditorium shattered into absolute chaos. It was the sound of a billion-dollar valuation evaporating in real time. 5,000 smartphones simultaneously shot up into the air, their screens glowing like a swarm of fireflies, recording every single disastrous second for live social media broadcasts. The media section erupted. A tidal wave of white-hot camera flashes ignited, but they were no longer aimed at the stage. The journalists pivoted aggressively, turning their lenses directly toward the front row of the VIP section. They found Chloe. She was completely immobilized, her face drained of all color, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror as hundreds of flashing bulbs practically blinded her. The woman who had bragged about becoming the most powerful figure in the company was now pinned to her seat, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her sudden, catastrophic notoriety. Up on the stage, Marcus was physically unraveling. He sprinted toward the edge of the platform, frantically waving his arms at the terrified technical crew desperately typing away in the elevated production booth. "Pull the plug!" he screamed into the microphone, his voice cracking violently, echoing through the hall and over the live stream. "Kill the main breaker! Why is the screen still on?" I watched him flail from the safety of row 45. The technical crew was completely helpless. They could not shut it down because I had preemptively locked every single administrative console in the building. I had rewritten the root directory, effectively stripping the chief executive officer and his entire information technology department of all system privileges. The hardware belonged to me now. Marcus paced wildly, yanking his expensive silk tie loose, sweating profusely under the unforgiving stage lights. The immaculate, untouchable mask of the tech prodigy had been violently torn away, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, pathetic man who was finally realizing that he was entirely locked out of his own system. I stood up, the heavy fabric of my charcoal dress brushed against the padded seats as I stepped out of row 45 and into the aisle. The massive auditorium was a deafening cacophony of shouting financial analysts, panicked executives, and the rapid-fire clicking of hundreds of camera shutters. Yet, as I walked down the center aisle toward the main stage, I moved inside a perfect bubble of absolute silence. The intense, pulsing red glow from the 80-foot screen washed over me, casting long, sharp shadows across my face, but I felt nothing except a profound, chilling serenity. The architecture of ruin was complete. Marcus spotted me ascending the side stairs. His face was devoid of its usual arrogant color, his eyes completely bloodshot and manic. He locked onto the titanium tablet resting in my hand. "You!" he screamed, his voice raw and echoing terribly over the ambient noise. He lunged forward, throwing his entire body weight toward me in a desperate, pathetic attempt to snatch the device and kill the override sequence. He never made it. Two massive private security contractors, men whose paychecks and employment contracts were now officially under the direct jurisdiction of my private legal team, stepped smoothly out of the wings. They intercepted him mid-stride, grabbing his arms and forcefully wrestling him backward. I calmly walked past his struggling form, not giving him a second glance. I bent down and picked up the microphone he had dropped on the polished wooden floor. I tapped the top of it exactly twice. The sound resonated through the speakers with a sharp, heavy crack that instantly silenced the 5,000 people in the room. The silence was absolute. I raised the microphone to my lips. "As you have plainly seen," I projected, my voice crystal clear, steady, and entirely devoid of trembling. "The security architecture of Veritas Shield has absolutely no structural flaws. The algorithm is perfect. The fatal flaw lies entirely in the morality of the man who administers it." The crowd hung on my every word, thousands of phones still recording. I looked directly into the primary broadcast camera, speaking not just to the room, but to the global market. "My name is Violet Baker. I am the sole author, the lead engineer, and the legal proprietor of the core algorithm that powers this entire enterprise. And as of exactly 10 seconds ago, my legal counsel executed an emergency injunction because Marcus Thorne committed a Level 1 security breach by introducing an unauthorized, unvetted civilian into the primary server vault. He has violated the foundational terms of our licensing agreement. Therefore, I am officially and permanently revoking Veritas Shield's right to utilize my intellectual property, effective immediately. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow to the chest. The security guards released him, and his knees simply gave out. He collapsed onto the stage, his tailored Italian suit pooling around him awkwardly as he stared blankly at the floor. In less than 3 minutes, he had watched his $2 billion empire, his carefully cultivated reputation, and his entire net worth evaporate into thin air. The realization of his absolute defeat finally crushed him. Down in the front row, the chaos had swallowed Chloe whole. She finally managed to stand up on her high heels, desperately trying to flee toward the side exits to escape the humiliation, but she was entirely blocked. A solid wall of furious shareholders and aggressive tech reporters surged forward, trapping her against the velvet ropes. She had spent the entire morning bragging to me about how powerful and famous she was about to become. She got her wish. She was now globally recognized, forever cemented in internet history as the ultimate symbol of corporate sabotage and staggering foolishness. I stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward her. The angry crowd instantly parted for me like the Red Sea. Recognizing the true architect of the room, I stopped directly in front of her, trembling, terrified form. The camera flashes fired relentlessly, capturing every single micro-expression. I did not say a single word to her. I simply reached out, firmly grasped her right hand, and smoothly pulled my grandmother's antique emerald ring right off her finger. She let out a pathetic, quiet whimper, but she did not dare resist. I slipped the ring onto my own hand, feeling the cold, familiar weight of my legacy returning to its rightful owner. I turned my back on her. I turned my back on Marcus, who was now weeping softly on the stage. I smiled a genuine, powerful smile, and walked straight out of the Moscone Center through the main glass doors. I left them choking on the ashes of the empire they thought they could steal, fully prepared to build a brand new one bearing only my name. Thank you all so much for listening to today's story. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment and let us know. If you found today's story engaging and want to help us out, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the video description or the pinned comment. That $1 provides our channel with the essential budget to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and allowing us to continue creating these amazing experiences for you. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next story.